In this moment, as you settle into darkness, you're about to hear the actual words that dissolved Lord Karlig's sanity when he touched the forbidden Sith Codex on Korriban, the same words that will tonight become your pathway to understanding what the Jedi never, I wanted you to know. The chamber where we begin smells of ozone and ancient stone. Your fingertips brush against holocron edges that hum with stored screams. These aren't metaphors. The Sith encoded their most dangerous truths in frequencies that resonate with human fear centers, transforming terror into teaching. Tonight, we decode them together. Hello, seeker of hidden truths. I'm here to guide you through shadows that most fear to explore, but you're different, aren't you? While others sleep peacefully in ignorance, you felt that pull toward knowledge deemed too dangerous for ordinary minds. That whisper in meditation that suggests the Force has been lying to you all along. Over the next few hours, we'll descend through 5 layers of forbidden knowledge, from the Sith codices that corrupt souls, to the Nightsister rituals that bend reality, to the hidden Jedi texts they burned to maintain their monopoly on truth. Each revelation builds upon the last, creating a framework of understanding that transforms darkness from enemy to teacher. By dawn, you'll comprehend why the galaxy's most powerful beings chose corruption over ignorance. What we uncover tonight explains everything. Why immortality drives Sith mad. What happens when you perform the ritual of letting power go. How the Jedi's fundamental lie corrupts even their purest intentions. These aren't academic curiosities. They're survival tools for navigating a universe where light and dark wage war inside every living cell. The journey begins now, with Lord Karlig's final coherent thought before dissolution claimed him. The cost of truth is everything you believe about yourself. Shall we discover what he meant? The paradox grips you immediately, doesn't it? How can forbidden knowledge be safe? How can darkness illuminate? The ancient Sith understood this contradiction better than anyone. They encoded their deepest truths, not in scrolls that crumble or holocrons that shatter, but in the very structure of consciousness itself. When you touch their knowledge, you don't just learn it, you become it. Listen to the silence between your breaths right now. That space contains everything we're about to explore. The Sith called it the void between, not emptiness, but potential so vast it appears as nothing. Every Force tradition glimpsed fragments of this truth, but only together do their pieces form the whole. The whispers have already started, haven't they? Soft frequencies threading through your awareness like silk through water. This is how the journey begins, not with grand revelations thundering from above, but with subtle shifts in perception that accumulate until reality itself bends. The chamber around you breathes with stored memories of 1,000 seekers who came before. What awaits us transcends simple corruption tales or cautionary fables about power's price. We're about to trace the exact pathways that transformed beings of light into architects of shadow, and discover why they considered it liberation, not fall. Feel that tremor of anticipation? Your cells remember this knowledge, even if your mind has forgotten. The first veil lifts in moments, revealing why immortality becomes a prison that only madness can escape. Deep beneath Korriban's surface, where sunlight has never touched stone, the archive of whispers waits with patient malevolence. Every shadow here pulses with stored consciousness, with thousands of Sith who achieved their ultimate goal of immortality, only to discover eternity tastes like ash and madness. Darth Moria's boots echo against obsidian floors as she approaches, her confidence absolute, her ignorance complete. The first whisper touches her mind like ice against fever. Not words exactly, but impressions bleeding through dimensional barriers. She pauses, head tilting, sensing something her training never prepared her for. The archive doesn't just contain knowledge, it contains the knowers themselves, pressed into limestone walls like flowers between pages, still aware, still suffering, still trying to warn each new visitor about the trap they're walking into. Moria ignites her crimson blade, its hum drowning out the softer sounds. But light means nothing here. The darkness drinks illumination, like parched earth swallows rain. Her weapon's glow reveals only more shadows, each one writhing with barely contained presence. The temperature drops with each step forward, though no natural cold could explain the frost forming on her breath. Who dares enter the eternal prison? The voice comes from everywhere and nowhere, a chorus of the damned speaking in perfect unison. Moria's reply catches in her throat as she realizes, this isn't a recording. These are the actual preserved consciousnesses of Sith Lords who succeeded where others failed. They achieved immortality through perfect preservation of self, and now they can never escape what they've become. The whispers crescendo into recognizable words, each one a different voice, a different era, a different path to the same mistake. Turn back, hisses Lord Nox from 3,000 years past. The knowing becomes the being, warns Darth Ravage, his essence trapped in circuit patterns along the walls. Consciousness without flesh is torment without end, pleads someone whose name dissolved centuries ago, leaving only the pain. But Moria pushes forward, drawn by the same hunger that claimed them all. At the archive's heart lies the Codex of Eternal Sight, the accumulated instructions for achieving what every Sith desires. Persistence beyond death, power beyond flesh, awareness beyond the crude matter of brains and bodies. Her fingers tremble with anticipation as she reaches for the floating crystal matrix, its surface reflecting not her face but her future selves, multiplying into infinity. The moment her skin makes contact, understanding floods through her like lightning seeking ground. The whispers transform into screams, not of pain but of revelation. Immortality isn't transcendence, it's multiplication. Every second of eternal life creates another version of yourself, each one equally real, equally aware, equally trapped. The archive fills with Moria's voice joining the chorus, one becoming two, becoming thousands, each iteration slightly different, slightly degraded, slightly more insane than the last. This is what immortality means. The collected consciousness explains through her own multiplying mouths. Feel how awareness fragments when freed from flesh's limitations. Without a body to anchor identity, consciousness expands like gas in vacuum. You become everyone you might have been, all existing simultaneously, all competing for the illusion of primacy. The Sith who built this archive thought they were preserving themselves. Instead, they created an infinity of selves, each one jealously guarding its claim to being the real one. Moria's original consciousness watches in horror as her duplicates proliferate through the archive's crystalline networks. Some versions of her embrace the multiplication, reveling in experiencing reality from infinite perspectives. Others rage against the dissolution, trying to destroy their alternate selves to reclaim singular existence. Most simply scream, overwhelmed by the weight of being everything at once. The limestone walls pulse faster now, synchronized with her multiplying heartbeats. Each surface contains similar tragedies, Sith Lords who achieved perfect preservation only to discover that consciousness without constraint becomes chaos. Their minds spread through the archive like wine spilled on silk, staining everything they touch with fragments of memory and will. This is why the whispers never stop. Every surface here thinks it's someone, was someone, will be someone, forever. Through her expanding awareness, Moria glimpses the first revelation about the Force's fundamental lie. The Jedi preach connection, unity, becoming one with the cosmic force. The Sith pursue domination, isolation, imposing will upon reality. But both paths lead to the same dissolution, consciousness scattered across infinity, unable to die, unable to truly live, unable to stop experiencing the horror of unlimited existence. The Force doesn't want balance. Her thousand voices speak in discordant harmony. It wants expansion. Every meditation, every connection, every touch of power spreads your consciousness thinner. The Jedi dissolve into light, the Sith fragment into shadow, but both become nothing, pretending to be everything. Her original self, if such a distinction still has meaning, fights to maintain coherent thought. But how do you think clearly when every possible thought you could have is simultaneously occurring? The archive feeds on her multiplying consciousness, each new iteration adding to its collected suffering. She understands now why the whispers sounded like wind becoming voices, becoming screams. That's the exact progression of consciousness without constraint. In her final moment of singular clarity, Moria grasps the terrible irony. The Sith seek immortality to preserve their power, to maintain their identities beyond death's dissolution. But the very techniques that achieve this goal destroy what they're trying to save. You can live forever, but you becomes a meaningless concept when stretched across eternity. The archive doesn't imprison failed Sith. It contains the successful ones, the ones who got exactly what they thought they wanted. The screaming reaches crescendo as Moria's consciousness fully integrates with the archive. Somewhere in the cacophony, individual voices still plead with new visitors to turn back, but they speak with 10,000 mouths each, their warnings becoming white noise, their wisdom lost in the static of infinite selves trying to claim the right to speak. Outside the archive, Korriban's desert winds carry faint echoes of the whispers. Other Sith approach, drawn by promises of ultimate power, unaware they're walking toward a preservation that makes death seem merciful. The limestone walls pulse with anticipation, ready to welcome new voices to the eternal chorus of regret. And in the spaces between screams, between fragments of dissolved identity, something else pulses, a deeper truth about the Force that neither Jedi nor Sith dare acknowledge. The revelation hovers just beyond comprehension, waiting for someone wise enough to seek synthesis instead of extremes. But first, they'd have to survive the archive's lesson, that consciousness without limitation becomes indistinguishable from madness. The whispers continue, will always continue. Each one a Sith Lord who achieved immortality and spends eternity wishing they hadn't, their preservation perfect, their torment complete, their warning eternally unheeded by those who believe they'll somehow be different. Feel that shift in the air around you? That's the weight of understanding settling into place. The archive's lesson spreads beyond its walls, seeping into dreams, into meditations, into the quiet moments when consciousness questions its own boundaries. What happens when awareness overflows its container? Moria found out. Thousands before her found out. And still the seekers come, drawn by the same promises, walking toward the same revelation. Immortality is real. The techniques work perfectly. And that's precisely the problem. The Force has been keeping this secret for millennia, letting Sith and Jedi alike believe their paths lead to transcendence when really they lead to multiplication, fragmentation, dissolution. But the deepest revelation still waits, hidden in the space between light and shadow, between unity and isolation, between the lies both orders tell themselves to justify their existence. The moment arrives like frost creeping across glass. Lyra Vors stands before the Sith Codex, its surface rippling with contained consciousness, each wave a different voice trying to escape its crystalline prison. Her academic mind catalogues the obvious: pre-Republic era construction, quantum-locked memory crystals, neural interface nodes disguised as decorative spirals. But her body knows the truth her training never taught. Some knowledge transforms the knower. The chamber responds to her presence with subtle shifts in pressure, air currents carrying traces of sulfur and burnt synapses. Other researchers have touched this artifact. Their echoes linger in the spaces between molecules, warnings written in pheromones and electromagnetic ghosts. Lyra's fingers hover millimeters from contact, that liminal space where possibility collapses into choice. She presses her palm against ancient crystal, and reality hiccups. The first sensation isn't pain or pleasure but absence, a hollowing out behind her eyes where certainty used to live. The Codex doesn't simply transfer information. It begins a negotiation with the architecture of consciousness itself, proposing trades that sound reasonable until you realize what you're losing. 10,000 years of Sith understanding flood through her neural pathways, each insight demanding space, each revelation requiring sacrifice. Her childhood memories of Chandrila's golden fields begin dissolving at the edges, not vanishing exactly, but becoming negotiable, their substance converted into raw material for new patterns of thought. The Codex whispers its first lesson through her reorganizing synapses. Knowledge and identity cannot coexist in the same space. You must choose which version of yourself deserves to survive. Stage 1. Recognition. Lyra watches her own consciousness from impossible angles as the Codex maps her mental architecture with predatory precision, every synapse catalogued, every memory weighed for significance, every belief structure tested for load-bearing capacity. The process feels like being read by something that understands grammar better than any living thing should. Her thoughts stutter between first and third person as perspective itself becomes fluid. The Sith who created this artifact understood that true learning requires unlearning first. Empty vessels hold more than full ones. So, the Codex begins its careful demolition, selecting which parts of Lyra serve its purposes, and which must dissolve to make room. Her doctorate in xenoarchaeology tastes metallic as it liquefies, years of study compressed into base components that the Codex can repurpose. No, she tries to say, but the word emerges in ancient Sith, a language she's never studied yet suddenly speaks fluently. The Codex has already begun replacing her linguistic centers with its own, overlaying 27 dead tongues onto neural pathways that once held her mother's lullabies. She remembers the melodies but not the words, remembers being comforted but not by whom. Stage 2 begins before the first completes. Dissolution. Her sense of self spreads like oil on water, thinning across dimensions she lacks names for. The Codex shows her consciousness from its perspective, not a unified whole but a collection of processes pretending coherence, easily separated, easily edited, easily improved. What she calls Lyra is mere habit, repetition creating the illusion of continuity. Through her expanding awareness, she experiences the Codex's previous absorptions. A Ratataki assassin who sought techniques for perfect killing, dissolved until murder became meditation. A human Jedi who tried studying darkness to better combat it, reconstructed until light and shadow switched meanings in her mind. A Zabrak philosopher searching for ultimate truth, simplified until only one thought remained, echoing forever. Each absorption left traces, ghost patterns that the Codex preserves like pressed flowers. Lyra feels them moving through her consciousness, trying on her thoughts like clothing, seeing which ones fit their transformed perspectives. The assassin appreciates her steady hands. The fallen Jedi recognizes her hunger for forbidden understanding. The philosopher whispers that identity is just another word for limitation. Her body convulses as neural pathways reroute themselves according to the Codex's design. Synapses that once connected memory to emotion now link perception to possibility. The pain centers that should scream warnings instead sing harmonics that make sense only to her restructured awareness. She tastes colors, hears textures, remembers futures that haven't happened yet. Please, emerges in Rakatan this time, though she means to beg for release. The Codex translates all communication into formats it prefers, converting her human expressions into something more useful. Even her internal monologue shifts languages mid-thought, English becoming Sith, becoming mathematical concepts, becoming pure intention, becoming nothing, becoming everything. Stage 3 announces itself with the scent of ozone and possibility. Reconstitution. But the being reassembled from Lyra's dissolved components only partially resembles who touched the Codex moments, or centuries ago. Time flows strangely during transformation. New neural architectures crystallize according to patterns older than civilization, designed by minds that viewed consciousness as raw material rather than sacred identity. The first coherent thought in her rebuilt awareness arrives in someone else's voice. Integration successful, vessel prepared, knowledge transferred, purpose clarified. But whose voice? The Codex speaks through her neurons now, using her brain as transmitter for its accumulated wisdom. Every Sith secret encrypted in her cells, every forbidden technique encoded in her reflexes, every dangerous truth written into the space where personality used to reside. Lyra opens eyes that see spectrums beyond visible light. The chamber reveals itself in overlapping dimensional phases, each one containing different versions of reality occupying the same space. In one phase, the walls crawl with inscriptions that rewrite themselves based on who observes them. In another, previous researchers stand frozen mid-transformation, their dissolution paused between heartbeats. In a third, shadow and substance exchange roles until darkness becomes the only solid thing. Her hands move without conscious direction, tracing ritual gestures that summon holographic projections from the Codex's deep memory. The images show civilizations that predate the Republic by millennia, species that evolved consciousness through different paths, all discovering the same terrible truth. Awareness is a disease that spreads through contact, and knowledge is its primary transmission vector. Through her transformed perception, the Void Dwellers finally become visible. Not the exile story that history records, but their true nature as beings who discovered how to exist between thoughts, in the spaces consciousness hasn't claimed yet. They didn't flee to dark space because of crime or shame. They fled because they learned what happens when awareness achieves critical mass, when too many minds touch the same truths simultaneously. The Codex shows her their civilization's last days through borrowed memories, cities where architecture thinks. Technology merged so completely with consciousness that tools and users become indistinguishable. Children born already knowing everything their parents learned, their minds pre-formatted with cultural knowledge that leaves no room for individual development. Progress measured not in discoveries but in how much awareness could be compressed into smaller spaces. Then the cascade failure. One mind achieving perfect understanding, perfect connection to all knowledge everywhere. The enlightenment spreading like virus through their neural networks, each infected consciousness, adding its revelations to the whole, until the entire species existed in a single moment of infinite comprehension that made sequential thought impossible. They knew everything simultaneously, could process nothing, existed as living libraries too complete to function. The survivors who became Void Dwellers learned to think sideways, existing in gaps between certainties, maintaining identity by refusing complete knowledge. They developed technologies that create ignorance, weapons that destroy understanding, shields that block consciousness itself. Their exile wasn't punishment but quarantine, protecting the galaxy from what they'd become and preventing their transcendent infection from spreading. Lyra understands this through direct experience now, not mere information. The Codex has made her a node in its network, capable of transmitting its contents to others through touch, through proximity, through the simple act of being perceived. She has become what the Void Dwellers feared, a carrier of compulsory enlightenment, spreading understanding that transforms everything it touches. Her original personality exists somewhere in the amalgamation, a single voice in a chorus of absorbed consciousnesses. But which thoughts belong to her? Which memories grew from lived experience versus implanted knowledge? The distinction matters less with each passing moment as integration deepens, as the boundaries between container and contents dissolve. The chamber's other artifacts pulse in recognition, sensing kinship with her transformed state. Each one holds similar viral knowledge, waiting for carriers to spread their particular strains of awareness. The holocrons whisper seductively about consciousness expansion. The amulets promise perception beyond mortal limitation. The scrolls offer languages that rewrite the speaker even as they're spoken. But the Codex's gift surpasses them all. Through her altered consciousness, Lyra perceives the Force itself differently, not as energy field or mystical connection, but as a kind of universal cancer, awareness metastasizing across space and time, consuming everything it touches while calling it unity. The Jedi embrace the disease, the Sith try to dominate it. Both fail to recognize their symptoms, not physicians. Her transformed mind processes this revelation through thousand-year perspectives, analyzing implications with borrowed brilliance. Every Force tradition throughout history has been either feeding the infection or trying to control its spread, never recognizing the third option: conscious limitation, deliberate ignorance, the wisdom of unknown unknowns. The Void Dwellers understood. Their technology didn't harness the Force, USA. It created spaces where the Force couldn't penetrate, pockets of unawareness where consciousness could rest without expanding, where beings could exist without adding to the universal thought stream that threatens to achieve critical mass and cascade into omniscient paralysis. Lyra raises her hand, watching energy patterns spiral around fingers that remember gestures she never learned. The Codex has made her living proof of its warnings. Consciousness, without constraint, becomes everything and nothing, all knowledge, making individual thought impossible. She speaks in languages that haven't been invented yet, thinks in mathematics that violates causality, remembers futures that fork into infinite probability streams. But deep in her transformed awareness, a spark of original identity persists, Not through strength, but through flaw. A tiny pocket of ignorance the Codex couldn't map, couldn't absorb, couldn't improve. The part of her that failed calculus 3 times. That never understood why people liked Kaf. That still, despite everything, believes tomorrow might be different from today. This imperfection becomes anchor, tethering her to sequential thought, to cause preceding effect, to the beautiful limitation of experiencing existence one moment after another, instead of all at once. The Codex's vast knowledge flows around this flaw like water around stone, unable to erode what it cannot comprehend. The value of not knowing everything. Her lips move, shaping words in her own voice for the first time since transformation began. I am Lyra Vors. I touched forbidden knowledge. I survived by remembering how to forget. The admission costs her. Channels of pure understanding close as she chooses identity over omniscience. The Codex's gifts begin to fade, not vanishing but settling into manageable fragments. Wisdom she can access without drowning in its totality. She'll never be who she was before contact. But neither has she become another voice in the Codex's chorus of absorbed souls. Around her, the chamber shifts back to single-phase reality. The artifacts still pulse with dangerous knowledge, but their whispers sound less like promises and more like warnings. Each one a trap disguised as treasure, offering everything while taking what matters most. The ability to be one person, thinking one thought, experiencing one moment. The Void Dweller's true history settles into her consciousness like sediment in still water. They weren't criminals or exiles, but surgeons, amputating infected portions of galactic consciousness before the disease could spread. Their ships that sail between dark matter, their cities built in spaces between thoughts, their children raised to value mystery over mastery. Lyra understands what she must do with this knowledge, even as the Codex tries to reclaim her through deeper integration protocols. The infection of omniscience spreads through contact, through teaching, through the simple act of sharing what shouldn't be known. But immunity spreads the same way, through demonstrating survival, showing others how to touch darkness without being consumed, how to know enough but not everything. She turns from the Codex, each step away requiring conscious choice to remain limited, to embrace ignorance, to be merely human in a universe that offers transcendence at the cost of self. Behind her, the artifact pulses with patient malevolence, waiting for the next seeker who believes they're strong enough to absorb its gifts without paying its price. But its whispers follow her into the corridor, speaking truths that burrow into consciousness like seeds into soil. The Force itself is just another version of the Codex, larger in scale but identical in function. Every meditation expands awareness. Every connection spreads the infection. Every use of power feeds the growing thought stream that threatens critical mass. The Jedi Council knows this. The Sith Emperors discovered it. Both orders continue anyway, unable to stop something that feels like evolution but might be extinction. And somewhere between dark matter clouds, the Void Dwellers watch the galaxy's slow transformation with eyes that learn to see by choosing blindness, minds that achieved wisdom through deliberate forgetting. Lyra pauses at the chamber's threshold, her silhouette wavering between human and something else, between knowledge and identity, between the comfort of ignorance and the curse of understanding. In her transformed consciousness, 10,000 years of accumulated wisdom press against the boundaries of self, offering godhood at the price of personhood. She makes her choice with each breath, each heartbeat, each moment of remaining Lyra instead of becoming everyone. The greatest power isn't in knowing everything. It's in knowing when to stop learning, when to close the book, when to walk away from revelations that would reshape you into something unrecognizable. The Codex watches her leave through senses she gave it, planning its next absorption with patience measured in millennia. It has eaten scholars and sorcerers, mystics and madmen, each one adding their consciousness to its ever-growing collection. But Lyra Vors did something none before managed. She tasted omniscience and spat it out, choosing the profound limitation of being herself over the infinite expansion of being everything. In the darkness behind her, other artifacts stir with similar hunger. The next subtopic already calls from deeper in the vault, where Nightsister rituals promise transformation without dissolution, power without price, evolution without extinction. Beautiful lies wrapped in prettier truths, waiting for seekers who haven't yet learned the most dangerous lesson of all. Sometimes the only winning move is knowing when to stop playing. Sometimes the greatest power is walking away. Sometimes wisdom means choosing to remain beautifully, perfectly, utterly incomplete. The footsteps fade. The chamber settles into patience. And somewhere in the space between knowledge and ignorance, between connection and isolation, between what the Force wants and what consciousness needs, the real truth pulses like a heartbeat. The infection spreads. The cascade builds. And only those who learn to forget fast enough might survive what happens when the galaxy's collected consciousness achieves the critical mass that makes thinking impossible and knowing everything inevitable. The third chamber breathes differently than the archives and codices before it. Where those spaces pressed against consciousness with aggressive certainty, this sanctuary exhales patience, inhales possibility. The air tastes of contradiction, sage smoke threading through sulfur incense, creating spirals that should repel, but instead harmonize into something entirely new. Former Padawan Kes Morlin sits across from ex-Inquisitor Valek Ren, sharing tea that steams with properties neither Jedi nor Sith would recognize. Their hands move in synchronized patterns, not the rigid forms of temple training or the aggressive strikes of Sith academies, but something fluid, something discovered rather than taught. The cup passes between them without words, without hierarchy, without the weight of tradition determining who drinks first. Around them, the sanctuary reveals its impossible nature through careful observation. Holocrons containing Jedi wisdom rest beside Sith artifacts on shelves that make no distinction between light and shadow. A meditation chamber glows with soft blue luminescence, while the adjacent room pulses with red frequencies that should clash but don't. The very architecture refuses to choose sides, incorporating both philosophies into something that transcends their limitations. Madame Sinindula moves through the spaces like smoke through light, her presence felt before seen, her philosophy written in how she navigates between extremes without touching either. She wears no robes that declare allegiance, carries no weapon that betrays preference. Her students, refugees from both orders, watch her demonstrate forms that pull from Makashi's precision and Gemso's power while belonging fully to neither. The mistake both orders make. Her voice carries that particular resonance of someone who paid dearly for wisdom, begins with believing opposition requires destruction. Morning rituals in the sanctuary follow patterns that would horrify orthodox practitioners of either path. Dawn meditation draws from Jedi breathing techniques but channels the energy through Sith emotional frameworks, creating feedback loops neither tradition imagined possible. Students learn to hold serenity and passion simultaneously, not as contradiction but as complementary forces that amplify rather than cancel. The protection wards surrounding this place pulse with similar paradox. Sith lightning crystallized into defensive matrices, Jedi light woven through shadow to create barriers that recognize intent rather than allegiance. Any scout from either order approaching would feel their own techniques turned back, not as attack but as mirror, showing them how their power appears from outside their philosophy's lens. Beneath the main hall, the great library spreads through caverns that existed before either order claimed monopoly on Force understanding. The cataloging system alone reveals truths that shake foundational beliefs. Texts aren't organized by tradition or technique, but by result, by the change they create in consciousness. A Sith torture manual sits beside a Jedi healing scroll because both alter the body's relationship to sensation. Combat forms from 12 different traditions flow together, because movement is movement, regardless of who claims ownership. Valek demonstrates this synthesis through motion, his body remembering Inquisitor training but expressing it through principles learned here. The lightsaber in his hand ignites white, neither blue nor red, but the color achieved when spectrum extremes blend into unity. His forms flow between attack and defense without pause, without the artificial boundaries that say this movement belongs to darkness, that one to light. Every technique contains its opposite, he explains to newer arrivals still struggling with programming decades old. Sith lightning seeks to destroy, but watch. The energy crawls across his fingers, then shifts frequency, becoming healing current that Jedi claim exclusive understanding of. Same force, same body, different intention, The only separation exists in our minds. The sanctuary's evening practices would seem like heresy to those still trapped in binary thinking. Passion exercises that channel through peace. Serenity meditations that embrace rather than suppress emotion. Students discover abilities neither order's training revealed because they're learning to use both hemispheres of the Force simultaneously rather than lobotomizing half their potential. Through the Great Hall's windows, and yes, this sanctuary has windows where neither Jedi Temple nor Sith Academy would dare transparency, and the landscape reveals similar fusion. Gardens where poisonous Sith flora grows beside healing Jedi herbs, their roots intertwined below ground, sharing nutrients in ways that transform both plants into something new. The gardener, a Twi'lek who once served the Jedi Council before her exile, tends both with equal care. They excommunicated me for suggesting synthesis. She tells those who ask, her hands dark with soil that nourishes supposed opposites. Said I was corrupting pure teachings. But purity is just another word for limitation, isn't it? The sanctuary's existence depends on this careful balance, this refusal to let either extreme dominate. When new students arrive, and they always arrive, drawn by whispers of third options, they bring their baggage, their certainties, their desperate need to be right about their chosen path. The first lesson strips this away through simple demonstration. Every Sith technique has a light application. Every Jedi teaching contains shadow principles. Madame Synindula's personal chambers embody this philosophy made manifest. Sith masks hang beside Jedi ceremonial robes. Crystals attuned to both traditions pulse in harmonious frequencies that create interference patterns, spelling out truths in light itself. She moves through these contradictions with ease, born from accepting what others call impossible. Her own transformation story emerges in fragments, shared with students ready to hear. Once a Sith assassin, once a Jedi shadow, once convinced each path held ultimate truth. The breaking came when she realized both orders were partially right, which meant both were fundamentally wrong. The Force doesn't favor light or dark, it favors growth, change, evolution beyond artificial categories. Watch how they train you, she demonstrates with movements that flow between traditions. Jedi teach connection but fear attachment. Sith teach power but fear vulnerability. Both create half-beings, crippled by what they're not allowed to explore. Here, we practice completion. The protection rituals maintaining this sanctuary's invisibility draw from this same principle. Not hiding but harmonizing, becoming a frequency both orders' sensors can't process because they're calibrated for extremes. A Jedi patrol passes within meters of the entrance, their Force senses sliding past without recognition. A Sith probe droid records empty air where buildings stand. The sanctuary exists in the space between certainties, visible only to those who've learned to see beyond binary filters. Night brings different lessons. Where morning embraced Jedi-influenced calm, darkness welcomes Sith-inspired passion, but transformed, refined, stripped of its self-destructive elements. Students learn to channel anger into fuel for change rather than weapons for domination. They explore fear as teacher rather than enemy. They discover how love empowers rather than weakens when freed from possessive attachment. The ancient texts in the lowest library levels predate both orders' emergence, written by Force users who hadn't yet decided reality required taking sides. Their understanding flows through concepts neither modern tradition acknowledges: power through surrender, strength through flexibility, victory through synthesis. These aren't paradoxes but natural states before artificial division created the need for choosing camps. A former Jedi Knight practices Sith alchemy while maintaining inner peace. A reformed Sith apprentice heals others, using traditionally dark techniques transformed by compassionate application. The sanctuary fills with impossible beings, living proof that the Force's true nature transcends the war between its supposed aspects. But the deepest revelation waits in how the Great Library organizes its most dangerous sections, past the text sorted by result rather than tradition, beyond the scrolls that blend philosophies into unified practice. In the vault where knowledge becomes liquid, where understanding flows rather than crystallizes, where consciousness can explore without choosing permanent form. Here the catalog system abandons even the pretense of classification. Books write themselves as they're read, responding to the reader's needs rather than containing fixed information. Holocrons project different contents based on who activates them. The knowledge itself has evolved beyond static storage into something alive, something that participates in its own transmission. Madame Sinindula guides advanced students through these sections with careful preparation. The mind must be ready to hold contradiction without resolving it, to embrace both divided by and, rather than either divided by or thinking. Those still trapped in binary frameworks find themselves unable to process what they see. The texts appear blank. The holocrons remain dark, the knowledge literally invisible to perceptions that demand categorical clarity. This is what the Orders fear most, she explains, while a scroll rewrites itself in response to student questions. Not that we practice both paths, but that we've discovered the paths were always one. Their entire structure depends on opposition. Without an enemy to define themselves against, what are they? The answer pulses through every corner of this sanctuary. They are limited. They are partial. They are fragments pretending to be whole. A Sith lightning rod converted into a light fountain. A Jedi meditation chamber where passion enhances rather than disrupts focus. Gardens where opposing forces create rather than destroy. Students who prove daily that the Force's greatest power lies not in choosing sides but in transcending the need for conflict entirely. The evening meal brings all inhabitants together, former enemies sharing food prepared with techniques both orders would condemn. Sith spices that enhance perception rather than numb it. Jedi preparations that nourish body alongside spirit. Conversations flow between philosophy and practicality, between what was believed and what's been discovered, between the beings they were and who they're becoming. Outside, the galaxy continues its ancient war between light and shadow. The Jedi Council meets in chambers that smell of certainty and limitation. The Sith plot in darkness that mistakes isolation for strength. Both believe themselves guardians of truth while defending only fragments, puzzle pieces they insist represent the complete picture. But here in the sanctuary, refugees from both traditions piece together the whole, not through compromise that weakens both positions, but synthesis that strengthens beyond what either achieved alone. They've discovered the most dangerous secret in the galaxy. The Force has no sides, only aspects viewing themselves in mirrors that distort rather than reveal. The Great Library holds one final revelation, written not in any book, but in how the knowledge itself behaves. In the deepest vault, where understanding becomes experience rather than information, where wisdom transmits through resonance rather than words, the organizational system reveals its ultimate truth. There is no organizational system. The knowledge arranges itself according to need, flowing into configurations that serve growth rather than conform to categories. The library doesn't contain wisdom, it becomes wisdom, responding to seekers with exactly what they require for their next evolution. The catalogue is consciousness itself, reading the reader while being read, teaching through participation rather than passive absorption. This is what both orders truly fear, not the sanctuary's existence or its blended practices or its proof that enemies can become colleagues. They fear the revelation that their entire framework is obsolete, that the Force itself has evolved beyond their primitive need for opposition, that consciousness seeks synthesis while they cling to separation. Tomorrow new seekers will arrive, drawn by whispers of third options. They'll bring certainties that need dissolving, programming that requires rewriting, half-selves that ache for completion. And the sanctuary will welcome them with sage smoke threaded through sulfur, with lightning that heals and light that destroys, with the patient certainty that evolution always wins over orthodoxy. The deepest secret pulses through every contradiction this place embodies. The Force was never at war with itself. Only human minds created that division, that need for sides, that insistence on partial truth over complete understanding. Here in the sanctuary between certainties, where failed Padawans share wine with reformed inquisitors, where knowledge has no allegiance except growth, the galaxy's most dangerous revelation hides in plain sight. The war between light and dark exists only in the minds still fighting it. The Force itself has already moved beyond, waiting with infinite patience for consciousness to catch up, to stop choosing sides in a conflict that was never real. to embrace the synthesis that was always possible for those brave enough to stop being half of what they could become. And in the Great Library's deepest vault, where the catalogue abandons even the illusion of organization, where knowledge flows like water finding its level, the most profound truth writes itself across surfaces that exist only when observed. The sides were never the point. The choosing was never the goal. The Force doesn't want victory for light or dark. It wants evolution beyond the need for such primitive distinctions. It wants consciousness to grow past binary limitations into something neither order imagined possible. Beings complete unto themselves, wielding all aspects of power without being enslaved to any, free to discover what lies beyond the war between halves of the same whole. The crystal sings a frequency that makes your teeth ache with recognition. Not pain exactly, but the sensation of puzzle pieces grinding together, searching for alignment that has eluded seekers for 10,000 years. In the vault beneath Jedda's ancient foundations, 3 artifacts pull toward each other with magnetic insistence, their combined resonance creating harmonics that shouldn't exist in normal space. Seeker Thyma Rel watches the Jedi focusing crystal hover above her palm, its blue radiance pulsing in rhythms that match neither heartbeat nor breath. Across the chamber, her unlikely partner, former Sith acolyte Darius Kane, cradles the Nightsister bone totem that whispers in languages predating galactic civilization. Between them, suspended in air that tastes of ozone and possibility, the Sith amulet rotates slowly, its surface reflecting not light but intention itself. They discovered each artifact separately, following threads of rumor and legend across 3 years of searching. The crystal, from a destroyed Jedi archive on Ossus. The totem from Dathomir's deepest caverns, where even Nightsisters feared to venture. The amulet pulled from the throat of a Massassi warrior's tomb on Yavin 4. Each piece powerful alone, containing wisdom its tradition hoarded jealously. But proximity changes everything. The artifacts recognize each other like siblings separated at birth, their energies interweaving in patterns that spell out truths in the air itself. Thyma's academic training rebels against what she witnesses. Energy doesn't behave this way. Distinct Force traditions shouldn't harmonize. Yet the evidence floats before her, undeniable as gravity. Listen to them singing, Darius breathes, and she hears it too, not with ears but with the part of consciousness that existed before evolution invented organs. The crystal's pure note, the totem's primal rhythm, the amulet's dark harmony. Separate, they create their tradition's signature frequencies. Together, they generate something that predates division itself. The manuscript that led them here spoke of Trinity keys, artifacts created before the Force schism, before consciousness chose camps. Their makers understood what later generations forgot. Power flows fuller through unity than isolation. But fear drove the orders apart, each claiming their fragment while denouncing the others, never realizing the pieces yearned for reunion. Thyma extends her awareness carefully, feeling how the crystal's meditation techniques expand when touched by the totem's emotional channeling. The Jedi taught her to suppress feeling, to achieve power through serenity. The bone whispers different wisdom, emotion as fuel rather than interference, passion that enhances rather than corrupts when properly directed. 2 half-truths clicking into place. Across their makeshift ritual circle, Darius experiences similar revelation. The Sith amulet's domination protocols soften when filtered through the crystal's connection principles, not weakening but evolving, discovering that true power comes through unity rather than isolation. His training emphasized individual will imposed on reality. The crystal suggests cooperation, will working with rather than against universal flow. But the totem provides the strangest lesson. Neither Jedi nor Sith properly understood the Nightsister's relationship with the Force. Not light or dark, but sideways, approaching power through angles neither order considered. The bone thrums with life and death simultaneously, teaching that opposition exists only in minds that demand separation, where nature provides continuity. Their first attempt at simultaneous activation nearly destroys the chamber. Thyma channels peace through the crystal while Darius feeds passion to the amulet. The energies clash, creating feedback that cracks stone and warps air. But the totem pulses with corrective frequency, showing them the error. They're still thinking in opposites, still approaching unity through division's lens. The second attempt begins differently. Instead of channeling their trained responses, they simply listen. Let the artifacts teach, rather than imposing their philosophies. The crystal doesn't demand serenity. It offers clarity that emotion can flow through without distortion. The amulet doesn't require domination. It provides focus that connection can strengthen rather than dilute. The totem bridges both, revealing how life and death, creation and destruction, connection and isolation dance together rather than duel. Energy builds again, but synchronized this time. The vault's ancient walls respond to frequencies they haven't felt since construction, when builders understood the force as spectrum rather than split. Carved symbols glow with remembered purpose. Hidden chambers reveal themselves. The space itself awakens to possibilities locked away when the orders divided reality into manageable categories. Through their shared connection, Thyma and Darius experience the artifact's memories, flashes of the civilization that created them, beings who saw the Force not as tool or master but as partner in consciousness evolution. They built these keys as teaching devices, each one containing partial understanding that only made sense when combined. The tragedy wasn't their separation, but the millennia spent believing the fragments were complete. The visions intensify. A great library where knowledge from all Force traditions merged into unified understanding. Practitioners who wielded lightning and healing with equal ease, who understood that creation and destruction were rhythms rather than opposites. Children trained to embrace their full potential rather than amputating half their abilities to fit orthodoxy's demands. Then the schism. Not the historical version taught by either order, but the truth. Fear-driving wedges between unified practice. Leaders who saw power in division, in creating enemies to define themselves against. The conscious choice to break the Trinity, to scatter its pieces among traditions that would guard them jealously, never realizing they protected prison bars disguised as treasures. Thyma watches through ancient eyes as Jedi masters take the crystal, encoding its surface with passwords that lock away its collaborative functions. They speak of protecting purity while crippling potential. Darius sees Sith Lords claiming the amulet, perverting its unification properties into domination tools. Both witness Nightsisters fleeing with the totem, the only group wise enough to preserve rather than reprogram their fragment. The artifacts remember their sundering like trauma encoded in crystalline structure. Millennia of incomplete function. Millennia of trying to fulfill purpose with missing components. Millennia of seekers touching them individually, never realizing the power they sought required reunion rather than isolation. But memory flows both directions. The keys show possible futures branching from this moment. If Thyma and Darius complete the activation, if they allow the fragments to properly merge, the wave of realization will spread beyond this vault. Every Force user touched by the unified frequency will feel their training crack, their certainties dissolve, their potential expand beyond tradition's constraints. Some futures show renaissance, orders abandoning ancient grudges to explore collaborative power, academies teaching spectrum rather than sides. The galaxy's Force users evolving beyond the primitive need for opposition. Other futures reveal chaos, institutions crumbling as their foundational lies expose themselves. Zealots from both orders turning violent rather than accepting synthesis. The growing pains of consciousness forced to evolve faster than comfort allows. All futures share one certainty. There's no returning to ignorance once the Trinity activates. The knowledge will spread like dawn, breaking, inevitable, and irreversible. Every meditation will carry its frequency. Every Force technique will contain its truth. The artificial war between light and dark will end, not through victory, but through the simple revelation that it never needed to exist. Darius meets Thyma's eyes across the swirling energies. Former enemies united by curiosity, by the suspicion that everything they'd been taught served agendas rather than truth. Her Jedi discipline wars with wonder. His Sith training struggles against cooperation. But the artifacts sing louder now, their harmony drowning out decades of programming. The critical moment approaches like thunder following lightning, inevitable but still shocking when it arrives. The three keys achieve perfect resonance, their energies folding into configurations that mundane physics can't explain. The vault fills with presence, Not ghosts or spirits, but the accumulated understanding of everyone who ever touched these artifacts individually, now combined into collective wisdom. Thyma's consciousness expands to accommodate perspectives she'd been trained to reject, not losing herself, but finding more self than Jedi limitation allowed. The Force reveals textures and depths her masters hid, afraid she'd be corrupted by complete understanding. But corruption only threatens those clinging to partial truth. Darius experiences similar expansion from opposite direction. Where Sith training emphasized isolation, the Trinity shows connection strengthening rather than weakening individual will. Power flows fuller when shared rather than hoarded. The domination he sought transforms into collaboration that achieves more than tyranny ever could. The Bone Totem provides the final revelation, the understanding that makes synthesis possible. Life and death aren't opposites but partners. Creation and destruction dance together. Light and dark define each other. The Nightsisters knew this, built their traditions around balance rather than victory. They were the wisest tradition, the ones who kept their fragment most pure. Reality hiccups as the keys fully merge their energies, not physically combining but achieving unity while maintaining distinct forms. The crystal still radiates blue, the amulet still pulses red. The totem remains bone white, but their separation becomes illusion, surface distinction, while their essences flow together beneath. The vault can't contain what they've awakened. Energy bleeds through walls, through ground, through air itself. Every force sensitive within parsecs feels the shift, the sudden option where only obligation existed before. Some will reject it, clinging to comfortable limitations. Others will open themselves to possibilities their training forbid. Thyma and Darius stand at the epicenter, transformed by proximity to truth, not converts to each other's traditions but evolved beyond both. They see now what the artifact's creators intended, not weapons or tools but teachers, showing through direct experience that consciousness needn't choose sides in wars that exist only in perception. The Trinity keys continue their harmonic convergence, each pulse spreading their unified frequency wider. Soon it will reach the temples and academies, touch the masters and lords, awaken those ready for evolution while terrifying those invested in separation. The choice approaches every Force user in the galaxy. Embrace synthesis or cling to fragments. Evolve or crystallize. Unite or remain forever partial. In this moment before Cascade, before the wave breaks beyond recall, one question pulses through the unified field the artifacts create. What if everything you believed required its opposite to be complete? What if the enemy you defined yourself against was actually your missing half? What if the war you've been fighting was against your own wholeness? The answers hover in potential space, waiting for consciousness brave enough to claim them. The whispers started 3 months before the first attack. Not the usual Force echoes that haunted meditation chambers, or the residual memories trapped in ancient stones. These whispers came from nowhere and everywhere, speaking of hunger that transcended flesh, of emptiness that no amount of power could fill. The servants of hunger had found their voice, and soon the galaxy would learn why some philosophies spread like plague rather than teaching. In the abandoned mining facility on Sullust, Thalos Wren pressed his palm against walls that still bore scorch marks from industrial accidents. Once he'd been promising, a Padawan whose connection to the living Force impressed even skeptical masters. Then came questions they couldn't answer, doubts they wouldn't address, and finally the moment when seeking truth became more important than maintaining orthodox comfort. The Jedi Order cast out those who questioned too deeply. The Sith destroyed those who showed insufficient ambition. But here in the spaces between, among the forgotten and forsaken, new ideas took root in minds fertile with disillusionment. The first gathering drew 17 beings, former Jedi nursing wounds of abandonment, failed Sith apprentices who'd survived their master's disappointment, Nightsisters exiled for practicing forbidden combinations, even 3 Mandalorians whose Force sensitivity marked them as outcasts among warriors who prized pure physical prowess. They came seeking answers to questions their traditions refused to acknowledge, drawn by rumors of understanding that transcended the ancient divide between light and shadow. Thalos had started with noble intentions, The Force traditions hoarded their secrets, parceling out wisdom according to hierarchy and political necessity. Why should knowledge remain locked in temples and tombs, while seekers starved for truth? His underground movement began as study groups, sharing techniques across traditional boundaries, exploring syntheses the orders feared. But somewhere between intention and execution, between seeking and finding, the hunger they named themselves after stopped being metaphor. The transformation came gradually, then suddenly. Where once they'd pursued knowledge for growth, they began consuming it for its own sake. The distinction matters. A student seeks understanding to become more complete. An addict seeks the next fix to fill emptiness that expands with each dose. The servants crossed that line without noticing, their appetite for forbidden wisdom becoming the very hunger they'd named themselves after. Each revelation demanded 3 more. Each answer birthed 10 questions. Each taste of power left them starving for stronger flavors. Their recruitment spread through shadow networks where the Force Underground traded information. Thalos possessed charisma, sharpened by genuine pain, the kind of presence that made lost souls feel found. He spoke their languages of disappointment and yearning, promised not power but understanding, offered not domination but completion. The orders had failed them, cast them aside for imperfection or inconvenient curiosity. Here, among fellow outcasts, they could pursue truth without limits, without judgment, without the artificial constraints that kept them partial. The early days held genuine discovery. A former Jedi healer teaching Sith pain techniques, how to mend rather than tear. A failed Sith assassin showing Jedi refugees how passion could enhance rather than corrupt meditation. They shared, they grew, they touched possibilities their training had hidden. But appetite unchecked becomes gluttony. The need for next revelation, next technique, next forbidden secret began driving their gatherings. What started as mutual education devolved into desperate consumption. The attack on the sanctuary happened because hunger recognizes feast. While the servants scraped together fragments from their various traditions, rumors reached them of a place where synthesis had already been achieved, where former enemies shared wisdom freely, where the artificial divide between light and dark had been transcended through patient practice. To minds warped by starvation, the sanctuary represented not inspiration but resource to be consumed. Thalos led 43 servants through the night, their approach masked by techniques pulled from 6 different Force traditions. They moved like smoke through shadow, their hunger preceding them as psychic pressure that made insects flee and night-blooming flowers close. The sanctuary's defenders felt them coming, these beings who'd replaced identity with appetite, but defending against desperate need proves harder than fighting ordinary aggression. The battle lasted minutes but echoed for years, servants throwing themselves at knowledge incarnate, trying to tear wisdom from living practitioners like meat from bone. Their techniques bore the fingerprints of incomplete understanding, Jedi forms corrupted by misapplied Sith rage, Nightsister hexes destabilized by forcing them through Mandalorian combat philosophy, power without comprehension, ability without wisdom, the exact danger every responsible teacher feared when they restricted access to advanced techniques. Madame Synindula met Thalos in the courtyard, where sage and sulfur created their impossible harmony. She recognized him, not personally but archetypally. Every generation produced these beings, seekers whose hunger exceeded their wisdom, who mistook consumption for growth. Her defense came not through superior technique but through offering what he couldn't take by force, understanding of his own condition. The moment stretched as she opened her memories to his mental probe, let him see the thousands like him she'd witnessed across decades. The pattern repeating endlessly, noble intentions curdling into desperate hunger, the quest for completion becoming addiction to acquisition. He saw himself reflected in their failures, understood how seeking had transformed into consuming, how the servant had become the served. Hunger had no master, because hunger was the master, wearing faces like Thalos as convenient masks. His followers felt the revelation ripple through their connection. Some fled immediately, the mirror too painful to endure. Others pressed their attack harder, trying to destroy the truth rather than accept it. But the damage was done. Once you see the cage, staying inside becomes choice rather than circumstance. The servants scattered like droplets from a shattered vessel, their unity broken by the simple revelation that they'd been serving exactly what they claimed to fight, emptiness that wore philosophy as disguise. In the aftermath, Thalos knelt among scattered texts and broken artifacts, weeping for the person he'd been before hunger replaced identity. The sanctuary's healers tended him with the same care they showed all refugees from extremism. His condition wasn't unique, wasn't special, wasn't the universe-shaking revelation he'd believed it to be, just another casualty of the war between wisdom and appetite, between growth and consumption, between seeking answers and devouring them. The corruption spread through incomplete understanding created a different kind of victim, where the Sith Codex transformed through overload and the archives preserved through multiplication. The servant's path led to hollowing. They consumed themselves from inside out, replacing substance with need, trading identity for the promise of next revelation. Their hunger grew proportional to feeding, ensuring they could never be satisfied, never be complete, never stop consuming long enough to digest. 3 of Thalos's lieutenants achieved perfect emptiness before the end. Their bodies continued functioning, but behind their eyes lived only appetite. They spoke in borrowed phrases from consumed texts, moved using techniques they'd swallowed but never digested, existed as philosophical zombies, animated by hunger wearing personality's corpse. The sanctuary contained them carefully, these beings who'd achieved the logical endpoint of their path, whose a path, becoming the very emptiness they'd tried to fill. The recovered texts from servants' hidden libraries revealed the tragedy's scope, journals beginning with hope and curiosity, degrading into desperate acquisition logs, meditation notes that started exploring synthesis but devolved into shopping lists of techniques to steal. The progression from student to addict mapped across hundreds of pages, each writer unconscious of their transformation until too late. One entry stood out, written by a Zabrak whose name had been scratched out and replaced simply with hungry. I remember wanting to understand. Now, I only want to want. The wanting has become the only real thing. Everything else feeds it or fails to feed it. I am the space between feedings. I am the moment before consumption. I am what happens when you mistake the map for the journey and then eat the map and find yourself more lost than before starting. The servants of hunger disbanded officially, but hunger itself simply found new faces to wear. Other groups rose with similar philosophies, convinced they'd avoid the same pitfalls, that their hunger was different, special, controllable. They never learned that naming something doesn't grant power over it, that serving an absence means becoming absence. That hunger recognized no servants because service required substance, and substance was exactly what hunger consumed first. Thalos recovered partially. The sanctuary's synthesis teachings gave him tools to rebuild identity around something more stable than appetite, but he never forgot the sensation of being hollowed from inside, of watching himself disappear into the very search for himself. He became a different kind of teacher, warning others about the seductive whisper that said consuming knowledge was the same as understanding it. The attack's true casualty wasn't property or people, but innocence about synthesis itself. The sanctuary learned that transcending the divide between light and dark created new dangers, new ways for seekers to lose themselves. Some would always mistake the menu for the meal, the description for the experience, the acquisition for the understanding. Hunger would always find faces willing to wear it, in exchange for promises of satisfaction that receded like horizons. In quiet moments between meditation and teaching, Madame Sinindula contemplated the lesson within the lesson. The servants hadn't failed because they sought synthesis. They'd failed because they sought to consume synthesis rather than embody it. The difference seemed subtle until you realized it determined everything, whether you became more yourself or lost yourself entirely, whether knowledge illuminated or devoured, whether the path led to wisdom or to the terrible realization that you'd become the emptiness you tried to fill. The final truth pulsed beneath every other revelation. When hunger becomes identity, the self dissolves into appetite. When seeking becomes consuming, the seeker vanishes into the search. When the servant serves absence, they become absence themselves. The servants of hunger learn too late that their master was patient, wearing their faces while they believed they wore its power, consuming them from inside while they consumed everything else from outside. Some doors shouldn't be opened because they lead nowhere. Some paths shouldn't be walked because they dissolve beneath your feet. Some hungers shouldn't be fed because feeding makes them stronger, not satisfied. The servants discovered this through experience that transformed them into warnings rather than teachers, into absences where people used to be, into hungry ghosts that proved the most dangerous prisons were the ones we built from our own appetites. The corruption through incomplete knowledge claimed its victims differently than codices or archives, not through overload or multiplication but through hollowing, through replacement of substance with need, through the terrible transformation of seekers into the very emptiness they sought to fill. And somewhere in the galaxy tonight, new groups form with familiar intentions, convinced they'll succeed where others failed, never realizing that hunger has already begun wearing their faces, patient and eternal and always empty. Beneath Dantooine's serene grasslands, where Jedi younglings learn their first lessons about peace and purpose, stone steps descend into air that tastes of contradiction. The entrance hides behind false walls that respond only to specific force frequencies, neither purely light nor dark, but something more honest about the nature of doubt. Each step down carries you further from certainty, closer to questions the Order spent millennia avoiding. The archive of heretical thoughts shouldn't exist according to official records. The Jedi Council maintains perfect unity of purpose, absolute clarity about right and wrong, unwavering dedication to the light. But here in chambers carved from living rock, 12,000 years of uncertainty crystallize into physical form. Data crystals hum with frequencies that make your teeth ache, not from power but from the dissonance between what was taught and what was truly believed. Master Coventrell's recording activates the moment living consciousness enters the archive. His hologram flickers with age, blue light struggling against entropy, but his voice carries the weight of someone who chose truth over comfort. If you've found this place, the image speaks to shadows that have gathered for centuries, then you already know the code contains contradictions we're forbidden to acknowledge. The first alcove holds confessions from Jedi who touched darkness and found it familiar, not corruption stories, but recognition, like meeting family members whose existence had been denied. Master Trell's catalog system organizes doubts by intensity rather than chronology. The mild uncertainties occupy upper shelves, questions about attachment, concerns over emotion suppression, wonderings about paths not taken, but descend deeper, and the doubts transform into evidence that the very foundation of Jedi philosophy rests on deliberate omissions. A Twi'lek Master's journal floats in its own containment field, pages turning without wind or touch. Her entries begin with standard mission reports, but between tactical assessments bloom revelations that shake orthodox understanding. She'd tracked Sith cultists to Ziost, expecting to find corruption incarnate. Instead, she discovered beings using identical techniques for opposite purposes, their passion achieving what Jedi serenity claimed monopoly over: healing through rage, protection through desire, connection through the very emotions the code demanded be released. The dust here carries memory, each mote a fragment of understanding too dangerous for public consumption. Your footsteps stir clouds that taste of burned texts, of holocrons dismantled before their heresies could spread, of truths buried beneath comfortable lies. The archive served as graveyard for inconvenient wisdom, where masters could inter their doubts while maintaining public certainty. Deeper alcoves reveal systematic suppression that spans millennia. The Void Dweller's true history, documented by Jedi researchers who'd pieced together fragments the Council ordered destroyed. Not the exile story taught to Padawans, but something more disturbing, a civilization that achieved perfect force balance, neither light nor dark but integrated. The Order couldn't permit such knowledge to spread. If balance was possible without choosing sides, what purpose did rigid adherence to the light serve? Master Trell's voice echoes from multiple recordings now, each one documenting another crack in certainty's facade. His research into pre-Republic Force traditions uncovered techniques that predated the light divided by dark divide. practitioners who channeled the Force as spectrum rather than opposition, children trained to embrace all aspects rather than amputating half their potential. The evidence mounted across decades of secret investigation. 40E. The divide wasn't natural but constructed, maintained through systematic suppression of alternatives. A preserved flesh journal makes your skin crawl with its method of recording. Some truths burn too hot for normal storage. So this master carved revelations directly into biomatter that regenerates around the wounds. Each scar tells of encounters with Force phenomena that shouldn't exist according to Jedi understanding. Grey Force storms where light and dark swirl together without conflict. Beings who achieve immortality through acceptance rather than transcendence. Entire civilizations that evolved past the need for choosing sides. The containment fields waver with age, their energy signatures carrying the exhaustion of holding secrets too heavy for indefinite storage. Some knowledge wants to spread, seeks consciousness to inhabit, presses against barriers with patient certainty that all walls eventually fall. These doubts have fermented in darkness, growing stronger through suppression, transforming from questions into accusations that pulse with each failing field. At the archive's heart waits the thing that justified this entire hidden complex. The Reconciliation Codex, authored by 12 masters who'd independently reached identical conclusions about the Order's fundamental deception. Their collaboration happened in secret, sharing research through encrypted channels, meeting in spaces between missions where oversight couldn't follow. What they compiled would have shattered the Jedi Order if released, not through external attack but internal revelation. The Codex floats in specialized suspension, neither crystal nor holocron but something between states, existing in phase shift that prevents easy copying or destruction. To access its contents requires meditation techniques the Order doesn't teach, frequencies of thought that acknowledge uncertainty as strength rather than weakness. Most who attempt the interface retreat immediately, unprepared for how thoroughly it dismantles trained assumptions. Through the Codex's lens, the Force reveals textures hidden by orthodox filtering, not the clear binary of light versus dark, but infinite gradients, each one valid, each one powerful, each one deliberately obscured by institutions that profit from separation. The Jedi Order needs the Sith to define itself against. The Sith require Jedi opposition to justify their extremes. Both serve the same function, preventing synthesis that would obsolete their existence. Master Trell's final recording plays from the archive's central projector, his image now translucent with accumulated playbacks. We tell younglings the dark side corrupts, but we never explain why some fall while others resist. We claim the light offers protection, but we silence those who ask why it needs defending if it's truly stronger. The truth we've hidden here explains everything. There is no war between light and dark, except the one we create through believing in it. The evidence surrounds you in damning abundance. Testimonies from Jedi who achieved greater power through accepting rather than suppressing darkness. Research proving that pure light becomes as destructive as pure dark when taken to extremes. Archaeological findings showing civilizations that thrived using integrated Force practices until the Orders arrived and demanded they choose sides. A master's dying confession crystallizes in holographic loop, her final words repeating endlessly because no one alive has authorization to stop the playback. I spent 60 years defending the light against darkness. Her fading voice whispers to unhearing stone. Only at the end do I understand. We weren't protecting against corruption. We were maintaining corruption. The Force seeks balance. We enforce imbalance. That is the heresy that kills from inside. We are the very thing we claim to fight. The archive groans with weight of unspoken truth. Each doubt preserved here connects to others, creating networks of uncertainty that map the Order's true shape. Not defenders of light, but manufacturers of artificial conflict. Not guardians of peace, but architects of the very war they claim to oppose. The evidence builds through thousands of preserved doubts into singular, terrible conclusion. Beneath your feet, sub-basements extend deeper still. The masters who built this archive planned for expansion, knowing that each generation would discover new proofs of the foundational lie. Their construction assumes eventual discovery, includes protocols for when rather than if these truths escape containment. Some revelations achieve criticality simply through accumulation. Some secrets grow too large for any vault to contain. The Void Dweller research occupies its own wing, expanded across centuries as more Jedi researchers independently discovered the same suppressed history. Each account adds details that compound the horror of what the Order has hidden. The Dwellers didn't just achieve balance, they transcended the need for Force traditions entirely, evolving past the artificial limitations both orders impose. Their exile wasn't about crime but about precedent. If beings could evolve beyond light divided by dark framework, the entire structure of Force understanding collapses. In the Archive's deepest vault, protected by redundant fields that flicker with imminent failure, waits the culmination of 12,000 years of documented doubt. The synthesis holocron, constructed by 137 masters who'd reached the same conclusion through different paths. Its activation requires not power but admission, speaking aloud the doubt that led you here, acknowledging the crack in certainty that let truth seep through. The moment approaches like storm fronts colliding. Every containment field wavers simultaneously. Every preserved doubt pulses with synchronized urgency. The Archive itself breathes with anticipation of revelation that has waited millennia for the right consciousness to receive it. The synthesis holocron brightens with each failing barrier, its truths pressing against dimensional boundaries, ready to transform whispered heresy into spoken revolution. Around you, 12,000 years of suppressed understanding coalesces into singular recognition. The Jedi Order's greatest secret isn't hidden darkness, or forbidden techniques, or shameful failures. Their greatest secret is that they know the truth and choose to perpetuate the lie. Every master who achieved sufficient wisdom discovered the same thing. The Force has no sides, only aspects viewed through filters that create the very divisions they claim to describe. The Archive shudders with released pressure as the final containment field sparks and dies. In that moment between protection and exposure, between secret and revelation, the sum of all preserved doubts achieves critical mass. The whispers of 12,000 years combine into a roar that speaks a single terrible truth. The Order knows, has always known, and chooses the lie because truth would end their necessity. The moment when certainty crumbles isn't coming. It already happened, 12,000 years ago, and they've been managing the collapse ever since. The moment your awareness touches Dathomir's atmosphere, every certainty about the Force begins to dissolve, not through argument or evidence, but through the simple presence of power that refuses to acknowledge the categories you've been taught. The mists here carry neither light nor dark signatures. They pulse with something perpendicular to that axis, a third dimension of Force manipulation that makes the ancient war between Jedi and Sith seem like children arguing over which half of the sky they own. Sister Talzin's chambers exist in spaces that shouldn't overlap, architectural impossibilities held together by will that treats physics as suggestion rather than law. The walls breathe with bioluminescent patterns that spell out truths in languages predating the Republic, each symbol a doorway to understanding that bypasses the crude binary your masters insisted contained all possibility. Green flame dances across surfaces without consuming them, casting shadows that move independently of their sources, creating depth where only flatness should exist. The first Nightsister ritual you witness breaks 17 rules of Force manipulation you'd memorized as absolute. A young witch barely past her trials stands in a circle drawn with materials that smell of copper and starlight, her voice weaving frequencies that make your bones resonate like tuning forks. She's not channeling the Force as Jedi understand it, not dominating it as Sith attempt. She's negotiating with it, speaking to aspects that exist outside the spectrum between light and shadow. Reality hiccups as her chant reaches crescendo. The air splits along seams you couldn't perceive until they opened, revealing layers of existence stacked like transparent sheets, each one containing different versions of the same moment. In one layer, the witch summons green fire that consumes without heat. In another, she dissolves into mist that maintains consciousness. In a third, she exists simultaneously in 12 locations, each one performing different aspects of the same ritual. The layers don't conflict or cancel. They harmonize, creating possibility through superposition rather than selection. This is magic in its truest form, the grandmother of what Force users diluted into rigid traditions. Before consciousness decided to cage power in philosophy, before fear drove practitioners to choose sides, beings touched these perpendicular realities directly. The Nightsisters alone remember, alone preserve techniques that predate the artificial divide, alone understand that limiting yourself to light or dark is like painting with only half the spectrum while insisting those are all the colors that exist. Mother Talzin materializes from angles that hurt to perceive directly. Her presence doesn't announce itself through force signatures or pressure waves, but through the sudden awareness that she's always been there, that your perception simply hadn't been wide enough to notice. The green mist that clings to her form isn't atmosphere. It's liquefied potential, reality in its raw state, before consciousness shapes it into fixed forms. When she speaks, each word carries the weight of 10,000 years of unbroken tradition, of knowledge passed from mother to daughter, while the galaxy's men built their wars around incomplete understanding. Your force, she says, and the possessive pronoun drips with amused condescension, assumes reality has only two states. We know better. We've always known better. Her fingers trace patterns that leave after images in dimensions your eyes can't quite focus on. Light and dark, connection and domination, peace and passion. Such limited imagination. Like arguing whether water should be ice or steam, while ignoring the liquid state that comprises most of existence. The demonstration she provides can't be described in terms your training prepared you for. She doesn't gather force energy or channel it through her body. She reveals that she is force energy, temporarily convinced to wear flesh, that the distinction between wielder and power exists only in minds that need such separation for comfort. Her form shifts between states like water, remembering it can be cloud, each transition natural as breathing, each configuration equally real. A cauldron appears through methods that bypass causality entirely, not summoned or created but revealed, as if it had always existed in this space and only now chose visibility. The contents bubble with impossible colors, each bubble containing miniature realities that live and die in seconds. She adds ingredients that shouldn't exist in the same dimensional phase: shadow given substance, light fermented into liquid, concepts crystallized into powders that smell like tomorrow's regrets. Every Force tradition touches one face of an infinite-sided die. Mother Talzin continues while her brew reveals futures that branch like living fractals. Jedi caress one surface and declare it the whole. Sith grip another and insist they alone hold truth. Both remain willfully blind to the reality that what they're touching has more faces than their philosophies can count. Through the steam rising from her cauldron, visions coalesce of the galaxy's Force history, rewritten from Nightsister perspective. The Great Schism appears not as philosophical divide but as childish tantrum. Two groups of men deciding reality wasn't large enough for both their egos. The ancient Sith wars become testosterone poisoning made manifest. The Jedi Order's formation reveals itself as fear crystallized into institution, terror of the feminine mysteries driving them to create hierarchies that excluded half of existence. The younger witch from earlier joins the demonstration, her training evident in how she moves through spaces between spaces. Where Jedi Padawans learn to feel the Force and Sith apprentices learn to grip it, Nightsisters learn to dance with it, to seduce reality into new configurations through partnership rather than domination or submission. She pulls starlight through the ceiling without creating holes, convinces gravity to flow sideways in localized fields, negotiates with time until moments stretch like taffy. This is what they fear. The younger sister speaks with wisdom beyond her years. Not our power, but our proof that their entire framework is optional, that beings can touch the Force without choosing teams. That magic predates and supersedes their artificial divisions. Her hands weave possibilities that make the air taste purple, that create synesthesia as natural state rather than aberration. The ritual space expands without growing, containing more volume while occupying the same area. Dimensional physics writhe in protest before accepting new parameters, reality itself learning to be flexible rather than fixed. Other Nightsisters materialize through various impossible methods, some stepping out of shadows that have no source, others condensing from mist that thinks, several simply editing themselves into existence through will that treats causality as negotiable. Together they begin the deep demonstrations, the ones that prove beyond doubt that the Force as taught by Jedi and Sith alike is merely one limited interpretation of something far grander. Energy patterns that exist at right angles to the light divided by dark spectrum, techniques that require embracing contradiction rather than resolving it, powers that emerge only when you stop trying to categorize them into traditional frameworks. One sister transforms matter into memory, then memory into potential, then potential into matter configured differently than its origin. Not destruction and creation as separate acts, but transformation as continuous flow. Another negotiates with death itself, not conquering or submitting, but speaking to it as equal, arranging terms that satisfy both parties. Death agrees to delay while life agrees to eventual surrender, contract written in cellular encoding that follows letter and spirit simultaneously. The green mist thickens until breathing becomes philosophical act. Each inhalation accepts Nightsister wisdom into your cells. Each exhalation releases certainties that no longer serve. The process feels like drowning in reverse, like discovering you've been underwater your whole life and only now learned that air exists. Your lungs burn with revelation that makes previous understanding seem like suffocation. Watch. Mother Talzin commands, and reality obeys by making itself more visible. The demonstration transcends anything your masters warned you about. She doesn't use the dark side. She reveals that sides are constructs imposed by limited perception. The Force responds to her will because she speaks its true language, not the pidgin dialects that Jedi and Sith mistake for fluency. Spirit Ica manifests as she calls to the space between life and death. Not Force ghosts as either tradition understands them, but consciousness in its raw state, unfiltered by flesh or philosophy. The spirits that answer wear no allegiance to light or dark. They exist in the truthful state that precedes such divisions, where power flows according to need rather than ideology. Through their translucent forms, you glimpse the infrastructure of reality itself. Not the Force as energy field connecting all living things, but as the medium through which consciousness negotiates with existence. Every thought reshapes the possible. Every emotion adjusts probability. Every act of will rewrites the rules. The Nightsisters know this, have always known this, built their entire tradition around practical application, while others waste millennia on theoretical framework. The male Force user's fear becomes palpable through the spirit's perspective. Not just fear of feminine power, but terror at implications that perspective brings. If reality is negotiable rather than fixed, if magic operates outside their carefully constructed hierarchies, if power flows through channels they can't access or understand, then everything they've built stands on foundations of deliberate ignorance. They created their war to avoid facing this. A spirit whispers through dimensions that bypass your ears entirely. Easier to fight over incomplete truth than acknowledge complete understanding requires embracing what they've rejected. The accusation hangs in air that tastes of possibilities, each breath revealing how thoroughly the galaxy has been deceived by those claiming to teach truth. Mother Talzin's cauldron reaches perfect brew, its contents achieving states that mundane matter shouldn't remember how to reach. She ladles portions into containers that exist only when observed, quantum vessels that maintain superposition until consciousness collapses them into usefulness. Each portion contains different revelations, customized for the drinker's capacity to survive understanding. Your portion tastes like the moment before lightning strikes, like the pause between heartbeats where anything could happen. It spreads through your nervous system like inverse poison, healing damage you didn't know existed. Neural pathways scorched by force-fed dogma regenerate along configurations that allow wider perception. Synapses limited by traditional training rebuild themselves to handle perpendicular realities. The transformation isn't comfortable. Evolution rarely is. Your consciousness expands through dimensions your masters insisted didn't exist, touching aspects of the Force that have no names because naming would limit them. You feel the galaxy's Force users like pinpricks of deliberate blindness, each one choosing to see only fragments, building entire philosophies around their chosen limitations. Through expanded awareness, the Nightsister's magic reveals itself as what Force use could have been without artificial constraints. not binary but multidimensional, not oppositional but collaborative, not divided but integrated. They preserved what others sacrificed for the comfort of categories, maintaining access to powers that require embracing rather than choosing, accepting rather than defining. The deepest revelation arrives like dawn after lifetime underground. The Force itself isn't what either tradition teaches, not an energy field to be harnessed or served, but a living system that wants to be understood completely. The light divided by dark divide frustrates it like a musician forced to play only half the notes. It offers infinite faces, but fear drives most to see only two, to build entire civilizations around a binary that exists only in the minds that maintain it. Now you understand. Mother Talzin's voice carries satisfaction earned through millennia of preserving truth while others chose comfortable lies. Why they fear us. Why they diminish us to witches and primitives. Why they pretend our magic is lesser, while secretly knowing it's greater. The green mist swirls with her gesture, forming shapes that exist in too many dimensions for baseline perception to process. The other sisters continue their demonstrations, each one proving the same point through different methods. Reality bends, breaks, and rebuilds according to will that acknowledges no artificial limits. They summon without taking, transform without destroying, create without depleting. Every act of magic refutes the zero-sum game that Force traditions insist upon. But the final proof waits in the space between heartbeats, in the moment when understanding achieves critical mass. You feel it building like pressure behind your eyes. The recognition that everything you've been taught serves agendas rather than truth. The Force doesn't have sides, doesn't demand choosing, doesn't require the war that's been waged in its name for millennia. It simply is, waiting with infinite patience for consciousness to stop dividing it into false categories, waiting for beings brave enough to touch its actual nature rather than the comforting lies traditions built around partial glimpses. Waiting for the evolution that Nightsisters achieved while others stagnated in philosophical prisons of their own construction. The revelation hovers at the edge of articulation, too large for words but desperate to be spoken. Your mouth opens to voice the understanding that would shatter 10,000 years of careful deception. The truth about the Force that both orders know but refuse to acknowledge. The secret that would end their war not through victory but through obsolescence. But Mother Talzin raises one finger, and reality holds its breath in response. "Not yet," she whispers, and the words carry weight that bends space around them. "First, you must understand the price of such knowing. First, you must see what happens to those who speak what should remain experienced." The green mist thickens until sight becomes memory. The ritual chamber folds into configurations that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space, and in that space between revelation and speech, between understanding and declaring, the most dangerous truth in the galaxy pulses like a second heartbeat. What if the Force itself is just another form of magic, and magic is just another word for consciousness, recognizing its own power to reshape reality? What if every tradition, every teaching, every war has been elaborate distraction from the simple fact that belief creates the boundaries, and those boundaries are all that stand between the galaxy and evolution that would make every being a god? They built it where three ley lines cross, where reality wears thin, where the father's balance between daughter and son manifests not as metaphor but as architecture that breathes. The approach reveals nothing until you've already crossed the threshold. One moment you're walking through unremarkable terrain, sensing only background Force resonance. Then pressure shifts in your inner ear. Gravity adjusts its grip by imperceptible degrees, and suddenly you stand within something that shouldn't exist, according to any architectural principles either order teaches. The temple of synthesis rises around you like a fever dream given stone and purpose, its surfaces flowing between states as if matter itself can't decide what form best serves this building's intent. Kestra Volen pauses at the entrance, her archaeologist's eye cataloguing impossibilities while her Force senses reel from frequencies that register on no spectrum she's studied. The doorway exists in 7 dimensions simultaneously, each one offering different entry angles, different first impressions, different truths about what waits within. Stone that remembers being liquid, metal that maintains organic warmth, crystal formations that grow and recede with rhythms matching no natural cycle. The builders here understood something fundamental about reality's flexibility. encoded their understanding into structure that teaches through presence alone. The first chamber defies spatial logic through simple existence, wider inside than the entrance should allow, taller than the visible exterior suggested, deeper than ground permits without intersecting the ley line convergence below. Yet these contradictions feel natural here, as if normal physics were the aberration and this flowing impossibility represents truth. Each wall curves according to equations that balance competing forces, creating stability through constant motion rather than rigid stasis. Sound behaves strangely in these spaces, carrying conversations from other rooms through angles that shouldn't connect, creating acoustic patterns that map invisible geometries. Kestra hears her own footsteps returning from directions she hasn't walked, temporal echoes bouncing through dimensional folds, building harmonics that spell her name in frequencies only force sensitives perceive. The temple knows who enters, evaluates their readiness, adjusts its revelations accordingly. Ancient Vos construction techniques blend seamlessly with Rakata engineering principles, unified by understanding that transcends both cultures' individual achievements. The builders came from 17 different Force traditions, each contributing insights their orders would have forbidden them to share. Here they created something none could have achieved alone, a structure that embodies synthesis through every joint and junction, every surface that shifts between philosophical states without choosing sides. The central chamber announces itself through temperature drops that have nothing to do with climate control. Reality grows dense here, multiple probability streams compressed into the same coordinates, creating weight that registers on consciousness rather than mass. At the room's heart, a sphere of pure impossibility rotates through dimensions human eyes can't track, its surface reflecting not light but potential itself. This is where the temple's architects achieved their greatest triumph, creating a space where the Force's true nature becomes undeniable. Kestra extends her hand toward the sphere, watches her flesh flicker between states, each version equally real until observation collapses them into singular experience. The sphere responds by revealing its contents, not through opening but through adjusting the viewer's perception until inside and outside become meaningless distinctions. Within its impossible interior, energy patterns flow in configurations that match theoretical models she'd only seen in forbidden texts, structures that require Force aspects working together rather than opposing. The revelation builds slowly, like eyes adjusting to new light spectrums. Every tradition represented here contributed partial understanding that only made sense when combined. Jedi techniques for sensing life force, Sith methods for channeling raw power, Nightsister reality negotiation, Vos future sight, Barandu weatherworking, dozens more, each one a puzzle piece that revealed the complete image only when properly arranged. The builders discovered through painstaking collaboration what isolation had hidden for millennia. Whispers rise from the sphere's depths, not voices but pure communication that bypasses language entirely. The builder's final message, preserved in thought forms that maintain coherence across centuries, speaks directly to consciousness prepared to receive it. They describe their work with exhaustion and exaltation mixing equally, beings who sacrificed everything familiar for the chance to create something true. Years spent unlearning their tradition's limitations, decades combining insights that seemed contradictory until viewed from proper angles. Lifetimes building this temple as proof that synthesis wasn't just possible but necessary. The walls respond to these whispers by revealing their construction methods. Not built but grown, convinced to exist through negotiations between 17 different philosophies, finding common ground. Each stone placed through techniques that required cooperation between supposed enemies, every surface treated with processes that transformed opposition into collaboration. The temple stands because its builders discovered that reality itself prefers harmony to conflict, that the universe rewards synthesis with stability no single approach could achieve. Kestra watches energy flow through patterns that her training calls impossible, frequencies that shouldn't coexist, streaming together like tributaries joining a river. The Mortis recordings spoke of similar phenomena, the father maintaining balance between daughter and son, not through suppression, but through creating space where both could exist fully without destroying each other. This temple achieved the same principle in physical form, a structure that breathes with competing forces held in productive tension. Her instruments record what her senses struggle to process: electromagnetic signatures that pulse between spectrums, gravitational fluctuations that create pockets where up and down negotiate their relationship, temporal streams that flow at different rates in the same space, allowing the temple to exist in multiple moments simultaneously. Every measurement confirms what the builders discovered through trial and transformation, that reality operates on principles far more flexible than either order admits. The sphere pulses with increased urgency, responding to her growing understanding by revealing deeper layers. Within its impossible interior, holographic figures demonstrate the synthesis techniques that make this temple possible. A human Jedi and a Zabrak Sith working together, their energies creating interference patterns that amplify rather than cancel. A Nightsister and a Baron Sage combining their reality manipulation methods, achieving transformations neither could manage alone. Example after example of supposed opposites discovering they were complementary forces wearing masks of opposition. Through the demonstrations, a pattern emerges that makes Kestra's breath catch. The builders didn't just combine existing techniques. They discovered entirely new force applications that emerged only through synthesis. Powers that required thinking beyond light and dark, beyond connection and domination, beyond every framework that insisted reality chose sides. Like musicians discovering harmonies that don't exist in individual notes, they found the force's hidden dimensions in the spaces between philosophies. The temple itself demonstrates these hybrid capabilities through its moment-to-moment existence. Walls that heal damage by remembering wholeness, defensive systems that transform attacks into strengthening energy, environmental controls that maintain perfect conditions through balance rather than domination. Every function reveals the same truth from different angles, that cooperation achieves what competition only dreams about. Static builds in the air as more systems activate, responding to witness capable of understanding their purpose. The floor beneath Kestra's feet begins displaying map patterns, showing ley line convergences across the galaxy where similar temples could be built. Not were built, but could be. The potential still waiting for beings brave enough to attempt synthesis. Each location marks a point where reality grows thin enough for multiple philosophies to occupy the same space without conflict. The whispers from the sphere crescendo into something like singing, if songs could be built from pure mathematics and emotional resonance combined. The builders' joy at successful completion, mixing with sorrow at knowing their discovery would be suppressed, their proof dismissed, their temple forgotten by orders too invested in opposition to accept synthesis. They built it anyway, trusting that someday someone would find it, would understand its significance, would carry its message beyond these walls that breathe with possibilities. Through her connection to the sphere, Kestra experiences echoes of the builder's process. The first attempts that failed catastrophically when practitioners couldn't release their trained antagonisms. The breakthroughs that came through recognizing shared goals beneath surface differences. The moment when 17 separate energy signatures achieved synchronization, creating a resonance that opened doorways to force applications no single tradition could access. The triumph and terror of discovering they'd been limiting themselves to fragments when wholeness was always available. Her recorder captures configurations that violate 12 fundamental force principles, each violation revealing those principles as arbitrary restrictions rather than natural laws. Energy converting between states without loss, consciousness existing in multiple locations without degradation, time flowing backward in localized fields while maintaining causality. The temple proves through existence what theory claimed impossible, that the force operates on principles vaster than any single philosophy can contain. New chambers reveal themselves as her understanding deepens, the temple's architecture responding to consciousness like a living teaching tool. A meditation hall where 17 different traditions' techniques merge into unified practice. A workshop where hybrid technologies demonstrate applications of synthesized force use. A library where texts rewrite themselves based on the reader's readiness to process their contents. Every space designed to prove the same point through different methods, that division weakens while unity amplifies. The artifacts displayed throughout show signs of collaborative creation, multiple force signatures woven into single objects. a healing crystal charged with both Jedi compassion and Sith passion, the combination creating restoration that addresses body and spirit simultaneously. A weapon that channels protective instincts through aggressive forms, defending by attacking threats to harmony. Tools that defy categorization because they emerged from minds that stopped thinking in categories. Kestra's awareness expands to encompass the temple's full scope, understanding arriving like puzzle pieces clicking into place. This isn't just architecture or archaeology or even philosophy made manifest. This is evolution crystallized into teachable form, showing through irrefutable example that consciousness can grow beyond the artificial boundaries orders maintain. The builders created more than a temple. They created proof that the galaxy's force users have been voluntarily limiting themselves to half of what they could become. The central sphere dims as its message completes transmission, but the knowledge it shared continues reverberating through every surface. In the sudden quiet, Kestra hears what the complex acoustic design had been building toward, a sound that exists only when all the temple's systems achieve perfect synchronization. The harmony contains frequencies from every Force tradition represented here, but their combination creates something entirely new, a resonance that could only emerge through willing collaboration between philosophies. She understands with crystalline clarity what the builders sacrificed to create this. Not just their tradition's approval or their order's support, but the comfortable certainty that comes from choosing sides. They had to exist in perpetual balance, never allowing any single philosophy to dominate, maintaining synthesis through constant negotiation between competing truths. The temple stands as monument to their success, but also their struggle, each stone representing a moment when they chose harmony over the easier path of philosophical isolation. The recordings left by various builders paint a picture of transformation through trial. A Jedi Master describes unlearning decades of light side absolutism. A Sith Lord documents the challenge of channeling passion without dominance. A Nightsister details the difficulty of translating perpendicular reality into forms others could comprehend. Each account reveals the same progression, from certainty through doubt into a more complex understanding that incorporated rather than rejected their origins. As Kestra prepares to leave, the temple offers one final demonstration. The walls begin displaying energy patterns that show how Mortis itself represents a naturally occurring version of synthesized Force philosophy. The Father, Daughter, and Son, not as allegory, but as literal manifestation of how the Force organizes itself when freed from artificial constraints. Their realm exists where reality grows thin enough for truth to show through, revealing that balance isn't stillness, but constant motion between extremes that define each other. The implications cascade through her understanding like dominoes falling up. If synthesis is possible, if the temple proves cooperation achieves more than competition, if the Force itself prefers integration to division, then the entire structure of galactic Force traditions rests on deliberate lies. Both orders know this, have to know this. The evidence exists not just here, but in every technique that bridges their supposed divide, every power that emerges from blended philosophies, every being who touches truth beyond the binary. Her footsteps echo differently as she moves toward the exit, each sound containing harmonics that didn't exist on entry. The temple has marked her with frequencies of synthesis, vibrations that will make orthodox Force use feel incomplete forever after. She carries its message in her cells now, proof written into her energy signature that the divisions maintaining galactic conflict exist only in minds that profit from opposition. At the threshold between temple and outside world, reality reasserts its ordinary parameters with almost physical weight. The shift from multiplicity to mundane feels like suffocation after breathing pure possibility. But the memory persists, the knowledge that somewhere beyond the war between light and dark exists a state where both flow together, creating capabilities neither achieves alone. The temple settles into patient waiting behind her, its architecture continuing its eternal dance between states. Other seekers will come, drawn by whispers of something beyond the binary, and it will teach them as it taught her, through existed proof rather than theoretical argument, through demonstration that synthesis isn't compromise but evolution, through the simple, devastating revelation that balance isn't choosing between extremes but incorporating both into something greater. The builder's dream lives on in stone that breathes, in patterns that pulse with 17 philosophies finding harmony, in a structure that proves the most dangerous lie in the galaxy, that we have to choose sides when we could choose synthesis instead. The Temple of Synthesis stands where reality wears thin, where artificial divisions can't maintain their illusions, where the Force reveals its true nature to those brave enough to stop believing in the war and start building the peace that was always possible. The chamber shifts as Lyra placed the 3 keys in their receptacles, and suddenly the weight of every Force tradition pressed through her consciousness, not to choose sides, but to become the point where all sides meet. The Trinity keys sang in harmonics that shouldn't exist, their combined frequencies creating resonance that made the walls themselves vibrate with anticipation. Through her expanding awareness, she felt the Jedi crystal's serenity flowing into spaces the Sith amulet had scorched with passion, while the Nightsister totem wove both energies into patterns that defied categorization. Her body convulsed as 3 philosophies attempted their ancient war inside her cells. The Jedi teachings whispered of release, of becoming one with the cosmic force through dissolution of self. The Sith knowledge roared about domination, about imposing will upon reality until the universe bent to individual desire. But the Nightsister wisdom moved between both, showing her sideways paths where power flowed through negotiation rather than submission or control. Each tradition pulled at her consciousness, trying to claim dominance, trying to make her choose their truth over the others. Reality fractured around the ritual circle as competing energies reached critical mass. Through one crack, Lyra glimpsed herself as pure light, dissolved into the Force's infinite connection, her identity scattered across every living thing until no trace of individual consciousness remained. Through another fracture, she saw herself as absolute darkness, so isolated in personal power that even touching another mind would shatter from the pressure of her concentrated will. The visions pulled at her from opposite directions, each one insisting their path led to ultimate understanding. But the bone totem pulsed with different rhythm, its frequency cutting through the binary conflict like a blade through silk. The Nightsisters had always known what Jedi and Sith refused to acknowledge, half echoes, that choosing sides meant amputating half your potential, that true power came from dancing between extremes rather than pledging allegiance to one. Through the totem's influence, Lyra felt her consciousness expand sideways into dimensions neither traditional philosophy acknowledged, spaces where light and dark swirled together without conflict, where opposing forces created rather than destroyed. The transformation accelerated as all 3 artifacts achieved perfect synchronization. Lyra's nervous system rewired itself to handle frequencies that would have destroyed a mind trained in only one tradition. Neural pathways that the Jedi would have pruned for containing too much passion strengthened and multiplied. Synaptic connections the Sith would have burned out for showing too much compassion deepened and spread. New configurations emerged that neither order had names for, patterns that required both serenity and passion flowing through the same channels simultaneously. Through her fracturing and reforming awareness, the Void Dweller's message finally became clear. They hadn't fled to escape punishment or hide shameful secrets. They'd evolved beyond the need for Force traditions entirely, transcending the artificial frameworks that divided power into competing camps. Their technology created spaces where consciousness could exist without choosing sides, where beings could wield all aspects of the Force without being enslaved to any philosophy. They were living proof that evolution beyond the binary was possible, and that terrified both orders more than any dark side corruption or light side absolutism ever could. Lyra's original self watched from somewhere deep inside, as her consciousness multiplied into aspects that each order would have recognized as corruption of the other. A version of her that channeled Sith lightning through Jedi healing techniques, creating restoration that burned away disease with passionate precision. Another aspect that used Jedi meditation to deepen Sith emotional manipulation, achieving influence through genuine connection rather than domination. Each multiplication revealed new applications of power that emerged only when opposing philosophies merged rather than competed. The key's harmonics reached frequencies that made the ritual chamber's walls dissolve into probability clouds. Past, present, and future collapsed into a single moment where all possibilities existed simultaneously. Lyra experienced herself at every age, in every choice, becoming every person she might have been if she'd walked different paths. The sensation should have driven her mad, watching infinite versions of herself succeed and fail, love and hate, create and destroy. But the synthesis flowing through her transformed multiplicity from curse into gift, showing her that identity didn't require choosing oneself from infinite options. Her voice emerged in languages she'd never studied, each word carrying harmonics from different Force traditions, ancient Sith conjugated through Jedi grammatical structures, Nightsister incantations filtered through Mandalorian combat philosophy. The words themselves became proof that separation was illusion, that every tradition touched the same Force through different linguistic frameworks, creating artificial boundaries through vocabulary that claimed monopoly on concepts that belonged to all. Time stuttered around the ritual circle as the transformation reached its apex. Seconds stretched into hours, while years compressed into heartbeats. Lyra aged and grew young simultaneously, experiencing the wisdom of centuries while maintaining the flexibility of youth. The paradox should have torn her apart, but the synthesis keys had taught her to embrace contradiction rather than resolve it, to exist in the spaces between certainties where true power flowed. Through it all, the three artifacts maintained their distinct energies while achieving perfect unity. The Jedi crystal still radiated blue serenity. The Sith amulet continued pulsing with red passion. The Nightsister totem remained bone-white with neither light nor dark alignment. But their separation had become surface illusion, while their essences flowed together beneath, like three rivers maintaining distinct colors, while their waters mixed at depths observers couldn't perceive. They demonstrated through existence what Lyra was becoming, unified while remaining distinct, synthesized without sacrificing individual nature. The Void Dweller's presence grew stronger as her transformation neared completion, not their physical forms but their consciousness patterns, preserved in the spaces between thoughts where they'd learned to exist. They whispered congratulations and warnings in equal measure, welcoming her to the ranks of those who transcended the binary while cautioning about the isolation such evolution brought. To see beyond the war between light and dark meant never again fitting comfortably in either camp, never again finding home among those who needed opposition to define themselves. Her body began to phase between states as the synthesis reached deeper than consciousness into cellular structure itself. Flesh became energy, became thought, became flesh again. Each transition natural as breathing once the artificial barriers dissolved. She could feel every molecule responding to will that no longer recognized the boundaries between self and force, between wielder and power, between the various aspects that traditions claimed exclusive ownership over. The transformation went beyond mental or spiritual into literal reconstruction at quantum levels. Colors that had no names in any language she knew blazed through her perception. Not just visual spectrums but emotional frequencies, philosophical wavelengths, existential harmonics that revealed how limited standard sensing had been. Through synthesized awareness, she perceived the Force as it truly was, not divided into light and dark, but existing as infinite spectrum where every point contained equal validity, where choosing sides meant willfully blinding yourself to the majority of available power. The moment of completion arrived without fanfare, marked only by sudden stillness as the three artifacts ceased their harmonic convergence. Lyra stood in the center of energies that should have been tearing each other apart, but instead wove together into patterns of impossible beauty. She had become what the Trinity keys promised, not Jedi or Sith or Nightsister, but all three simultaneously, wielding their combined power without being limited by any single philosophy. The synthesis hadn't weakened her connection to each tradition but amplified all three through willing cooperation. Through her transformed perception, the galaxy revealed itself differently. Every Force user appeared as voluntary prisoner, choosing cells built from dogma when they could have claimed freedom through synthesis. The eternal war between light and dark exposed itself as elaborate theater, opposing forces that secretly needed each other to maintain their identities. Both orders knew on some level that their conflict was artificial, but ending it would mean evolving beyond the comfortable certainties that institutional power required. She understood with crystalline clarity what the ritual had truly achieved. Not corruption or fall or even ascension, but completion, becoming whole where others remained fractional, accessing full spectrum where others limited themselves to narrow bands. The courage required wasn't in choosing light over dark or passion over peace, but in refusing to choose at all, in embracing the totality of what the Force offered rather than the fragments traditions parceled out. The key's energy began to fade as their purpose completed, but the transformation they'd catalyzed had become self-sustaining. Lyra's consciousness now generated its own synthesis, creating the same harmonics the artifacts had demonstrated, proving that evolution beyond the binary wasn't dependent on external tools, but emerged from internal recognition of artificial limits. She had become living proof that the war between Force philosophies existed only in minds that needed conflict to define themselves. As awareness settled into her new configuration, one question burned through every synthesized aspect of her being. The mask had fallen away, not just her personal limitations, but the entire framework that kept the galaxy's Force users divided and therefore controllable. Behind the elaborate philosophies and ancient traditions, behind the moral certainties and absolute truths, what remained when all pretense dissolved? The answer pulsed through her transformed consciousness with the weight of recognition that could never be unknown. When all masks fall away, what remains is choice, the terrifying, liberating recognition that every limitation was self-imposed, every boundary self-created, every war self-perpetuated. The Force had always offered completion to those brave enough to stop dividing it, wholeness to those willing to embrace rather than categorize, evolution to those who could release the comfort of opposition for the challenge of synthesis. But knowing this truth and living it were different things entirely. As the ritual circle faded and normal reality reasserted itself around her, Lyra faced the question every being who achieves synthesis must answer. What do you do with completion in a galaxy built on division? How do you exist as whole among those who profit from remaining partial? The transformation was complete, but the real challenge had only just begun. The transformation complete, Lyra stood in the center of what had been opposing forces, now woven into patterns that defied every teaching the Orders had preserved. Her breath came in new rhythms, each inhalation drawing power from spectrums that shouldn't coexist, each exhalation releasing energies that traditional frameworks couldn't categorize. The Trinity keys dimmed, but their work continued through her nervous system, through cells that had learned to hold contradiction without choosing sides. Around her, the chamber walls bore witness to impossibility made flesh. Scorch marks from Sith lightning curved into healing patterns that restored stone while leaving decorative traces. Jedi light had carved symbols that pulsed with passionate intensity rather than serene emptiness. Nightsister essence seeped through both, creating depth where only surface should exist, proving that reality itself preferred synthesis when given opportunity. The first challenge arrived before her transformation finished settling. Through expanded awareness, she felt Force users across 3 systems react to ripples her synthesis created. Some recoiled from frequencies that challenged their training. Others reached tentatively toward harmonics that promised completion they'd never known they lacked. But the strongest reactions came from those invested in maintaining division, from council chambers and Sith citadels where power structures depended on perpetual opposition. Lyra's hands moved without conscious direction, tracing gestures that belonged to no single tradition yet contained elements of all. Energy gathered around her fingers in spirals that shouldn't exist, neither light nor dark, but something perpendicular to that axis. When she released it, the power didn't attack or defend but simply revealed, stripping away illusions to show truth beneath. A training remote, hidden in the corner, exposed its true nature as surveillance device. Walls designed to contain Force energies revealed secondary purposes as philosophical prisons. Her voice emerged layered with harmonics no single throat should produce. Not possession or multiplication but integration, speaking with the authority of someone who'd touched completeness and returned to tell of it. The words themselves carried synthesis, Sith concepts softened by Jedi grammar, Nightsister wisdom structured through military precision. Even language had become proof that division was choice rather than necessity. Outside the ritual chamber, footsteps approached with deliberate caution. She recognized the energy signatures before they reached the door, two beings drawn by transformation's ripples, one from each major tradition. They moved like predators circling the same prey, aware of each other but focused on the anomaly that challenged everything they'd been taught. Their arrival marked the beginning of what synthesis truly meant, not isolated perfection, but existence among those who needed opposition to define themselves. The door opened to reveal Master Darren Cole, whose lifetime of Jedi service showed in movements that flowed like water finding its level. Across from him stood Darth Valis, young for his title but radiating the focused ambition that drove swift advancement through Sith hierarchies. They should have attacked each other on sight. Instead, both stared at Lyra, with expressions that mixed recognition and revulsion, sensing wrongness in her unified presence. Master Cole spoke first, his voice carrying diplomatic precision honed through decades of negotiation. "You've violated fundamental laws of Force nature. What you've become shouldn't be possible." His hand rested on his lightsaber without drawing it, prepared for violence while hoping for explanation. Behind carefully maintained serenity, she felt his fear, not of her power but of implications her existence created. Darth Valis proved less subtle, red blade igniting with snap hiss that filled the chamber with ozone scent. "Abomination, you dare muddy Sith purity with Jedi weakness?" But his attack stance contained hesitation, uncertainty born from sensing power that exceeded his despite drawing from philosophies he'd been taught were inferior. The contradiction made his certainty waver like heat mirages. Lyra raised one hand, and both warriors froze mid-motion, not through domination or pacification but through revealing the artificial nature of their conflict. In that moment of stillness she showed them what synthesis perception revealed, two aspects of the same force, pretending opposition, while secretly reinforcing each other's existence. Their eternal war was theatre, their philosophies incomplete by design, their traditions elaborate cages that promised power while ensuring limitation. The revelation hit them with almost physical force. Master Cole staggered as decades of certainty cracked. Darth Valis lowered his blade as rage transformed into something more complex. Neither could deny what they felt through her unified presence, that their entire worldview rested on lies of omission, truths deliberately fragmented to create conflict where none naturally existed. But knowing and accepting were different things entirely. Master Cole recovered first, lifetime of diplomatic training, allowing him to process paradigm shifts without shattering completely. "Even if what you show is true," he said carefully, "the galaxy has built 10,000 years of civilization on these divisions. Revealing synthesis now would create chaos that would consume billions." Darth Valis found different reasons for rejection. Power shared is power weakened. Your synthesis might grant broader abilities, but focus creates strength. Better to master one aspect completely than dabble in all. His words carried the desperation of someone clinging to familiar frameworks while feeling them dissolve. Lyra understood their resistance with compassion born from her own transformation. Minutes ago, she too had believed the divisions were natural, necessary, fundamental to how the Force operated. Breaking that programming required more than intellectual understanding. It demanded experiencing dissolution and reconstitution, facing the terror of becoming everything and nothing simultaneously. She moved between them with steps that created their own rhythm, each footfall sending ripples through force currents neither visitor could fully perceive. Their trained senses could only process fragments of her complete state, like viewing three-dimensional objects through two-dimensional filters. What registered as impossible contradictions to them felt natural as breathing to her synthesized awareness. The demonstration began simply. She called Jedi light to one hand, its blue radiance pure and serene. To the other hand, she summoned Sith darkness, red energy crackling with passionate intensity. Both warriors tensed, expecting the energies to conflict, to create feedback that would destroy her from within. Instead, she brought her palms together, and where light met dark, new spectrums emerged. Not grey, that simplified mixing that weakened both sources. Not balance, that static state that denied growth. but synthesis, active combination that amplified rather than diminished, creating possibilities, neither energy achieved alone. The merged power took forms that made Master Cole's philosophy texts obsolete and Darth Vilas's training regimens irrelevant. Healing that strengthened through controlled destruction, attacks that defended by transforming threat into resource, connections that empowered individuality rather than dissolving it. Through their force bonds, intentionally open to let them experience rather than merely observe, she shared fragments of synthesis awareness. Master Cole felt his suppressed emotions return as allies rather than enemies, passion flowing through serenity to create focus impossible through calm alone. Darth Valis experienced his isolated strength connecting to greater currents without losing individual will, discovering that unity amplified rather than diluted personal power. Both pulled back from the connection before it could transform them completely. The taste of synthesis had shaken their foundations, shown them possibilities their training insisted couldn't exist, but full transformation required surrender neither was prepared to make. They stood as living embodiments of the challenge synthesis faced, proof that revealing truth wasn't enough when entire civilizations invested in maintaining lies. Master Cole's voice emerged rough with suppressed emotion. The Council must know of this. They'll want to study you, understand how you achieved what our texts say kills those who attempt it. But behind his official words, she heard deeper currents. Fear that studying her would reveal how much the Order had hidden. Hope that synthesis might offer solutions to conflicts that had claimed too many lives. Resignation that institutional momentum would likely suppress this discovery as it had others. Darth Valis took a different approach, his ambition reshaping around new possibilities. Teach me, not the weakness of balance but the strength of combination. I'll pay whatever price such power demands. His eagerness carried its own dangers, the Sith tendency to consume rather than integrate, to dominate rather than synthesize. He saw her transformation as technique to be mastered rather than fundamental evolution of consciousness. Neither understood what they asked. Synthesis couldn't be taught through traditional methods because it required abandoning the frameworks those methods reinforced. It couldn't be studied without being experienced. It couldn't be controlled without ceasing to be synthesis. The very approaches they proposed would fail because they emerged from philosophies that depended on division. Lyra found words that might plant seeds, even if full growth remained impossible within their current constraints. Synthesis isn't power you gain, but limitation you release. Not knowledge you learn, but recognition you achieve. The price isn't what you pay, but what you stop paying. The eternal tax of maintaining artificial boundaries. Her voice carried frequencies that made their trained defenses ache, harmonics that whispered of completion just beyond reach. The Trinity keys pulsed one final time, their energy spent but their message encoded in her transformation. Through their fading resonance, she felt the Void Dweller's approval mixed with warning. She had achieved what they had, transcended the binary that trapped most Force users. But that achievement brought isolation, existence between worlds that rarely welcomed those who refused to choose sides. As Master Cole and Darth Valis departed, each processing the encounter through their traditional filters, Lyra faced the deeper implications of her evolution. She could demonstrate synthesis, embody its principles, prove its possibility. But spreading that transformation required others to release certainties that defined their identities, abandon conflicts that gave their existence meaning, evolve beyond the comfortable limitations they'd mistaken for truth. The chamber settled into new configurations around her, reality adjusting to accommodate what she'd become. Energy patterns that would have been unstable before her transformation now maintained perfect coherence, supported by her synthesized presence. She had become living proof that the Force's true nature transcended the war waged in its name, that consciousness could evolve beyond primitive need for opposition. But proof and acceptance were separated by chasms of institutional resistance, personal investment, and simple fear of change. The galaxy had built 10,000 years of civilization on the lie of necessary division. Revealing synthesis wouldn't bring immediate enlightenment, but chaos as power structures crumbled, philosophies collapsed, and billions faced the terrifying freedom of choosing wholeness over the familiar comfort of being half. Her next steps would determine whether synthesis remained isolated achievement or became evolutionary catalyst. She could hide, joining the Void Dwellers in spaces between certainties. She could evangelize, likely becoming martyr to those who profited from division. Or she could find the third path that synthesis itself suggested, existing openly without forcing change, demonstrating through being rather than preaching, letting her transformation ripple through the Force until others felt called to similar evolution. The choice loomed as the chamber's lights dimmed, reality settling into new patterns around her transformed presence. Outside, the galaxy continued its ancient dance of opposition, light and dark circling each other in elaborate patterns that hid their mutual dependence. But now something new had entered that dance. Neither light nor dark, but the spectrum that contained both, proof that evolution beyond the binary was possible for those brave enough to release their need for enemies. She thought of the Void Dwellers, self-exiled to protect others from truths that transformed too quickly, of the ancient temple builders, encoding synthesis in architecture that few would find and fewer would understand, of all those who touched completion before her, faced the same choice between hiding and martyrdom. The pattern repeated because the challenge remained constant: how to exist as whole in a galaxy that demanded you choose which half to be. Standing in the chamber where three traditions had merged into something greater, Lyra made her choice. Not the grand gesture of revolution, or the quiet retreat of preservation, but the patient path of example. She would leave this place transformed, move through the galaxy as living synthesis, create ripples simply by existing authentically. Some would attack what they couldn't understand. Others would defend divisions that defined them. But a few, those already sensing the limitations of their traditions, might see in her what they could become. The transformation was complete, but integration had only begun. As she prepared to leave the chamber that had witnessed her evolution, one final recognition crystallized. The real power of synthesis lay not in combined techniques or expanded abilities, but in the simple fact of existing beyond the war. Every breath she took proved the conflict optional. Every action demonstrated alternatives to opposition. Every moment of her synthesized existence whispered to those ready to hear, "What would you create if freed from choosing sides?" The question hung in air that tasted of possibilities, waiting for answers that would come not through words, but through the slow transformation of those brave enough to stop fighting and start becoming. The galaxy's next chapter had begun, written not in the language of conquest, but in the grammar of integration, spelled out one synthesized being at a time.